Salam Sejahtera, Salam Berjuang, and Salam Bersih. Now, before I go into why Bersih happened, David, I must make a correction. I did not act for Lena Joy in her case. That's a factual error. And I can also say this, but I was Bar Council President at that time. We issued a statement on it, but I never acted. I was never in that case, never involved in that case. But what's interesting is that ad nauseum, the press, the mainstream press, and even the Prime Minister kept accusing me of acting for Lena Joy and therefore being anti-Islam. I don't know whether you all saw that, but that was one of the accusations that was thrown at me in the run-up to the Bersih rally. Neither of which is true, of course. And even if I had acted in the Lena Joy case, how they can draw the conclusion that that's anti-Islam is again another leap, huge leap in logic. So a lot of things happen. So why did Bersih happen? That's the first question that I wanted to answer. And I think if we look back, we actually did have discussions with the Election Commission. In fact, it was in December last year that we had discussions. We've also actually shared, we've exchanged views with them a few times. And we were supposed to have a meeting with the Election Commission earlier this year, which did not take place because of the Sarawak elections. And we thought we would see what happened in the Sarawak elections before we decided on our next course of action. And we were utterly horrified at the reports that we were getting out of Sarawak. As you know, I was banned, so I didn't go in there and I couldn't see for myself. But the reports that we were getting from the people on the ground was that this was probably one of the dirtiest elections Sarawak has ever had. There was actually video evidence. There was video evidence of vote buying. And in fact, there was a story by Mionet, who's one of the NGOs on the ground, that Tuai Rumah, that is the head of the Longhouse in Tamin constituency, and this was on video, spoke of BN representatives giving him 3 checks, which amounted to 10,000 ringgit, while heads of family in the community were given 50 ringgit each. Now, and there were several other examples of that. We also had reports of the abuses of power at that time in Sarawak. Some examples of this were where the Deputy Defence Minister, Dato Dr. Abdul Latif Ahmad, reminded army veterans in Sarawak to not support opposition leader Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim during his meeting session with the Sarawak State Army veterans in Cebu. Now, the other allegations actually included a revelation by a Chinese community leader that government personnel, including the special branch officers from the police and military, would be stationed in longhouses in Sarawak in the last few days of the campaign period until polling day. Now, there were many other acts, such acts of intimidation that were taking place in Sarawak. Then, of course, you had the other improprieties that we brought to the attention of the Election Commission. We also asked the Election Commission to please consider giving Sarawakians who were in West Malaysia the chance to vote by postal ballot, because that could have easily been organized, so that they were not forced to go back to Sarawak. Many of them couldn't return to Sarawak to vote. Now, none of that happened. No steps were taken in relation to the electoral offences, despite the video evidence that was present, and really nothing happened. And in fact, the MACC, after seeing the video, said, you see, we can't really rely on video evidence. And they did nothing. No investigations, no nothing. Now, this is out and out vote buying that was happening in Sarawak. So after all that, we were very concerned. Bersih 2 was extremely concerned because we didn't want these election offences and these improprieties to spill over into the 13th general elections in Malaysia. Because as far as we were concerned, if they could do it there in Sarawak, they could do it anywhere. And it was likely that it would happen in the 13th general election. So we took a decision that we were going to have a rally, and we did it. We fixed the 9th of July only because there were rumors that the elections were due very soon. Well, certainly they were due before 2013, March 2013. So that was quite soon. So we knew we had to do something fairly quickly. We were also getting reports about phantom voters, about the poor state of the electoral rolls. We also got reports of permanent residents, in fact, also being registered, and all sorts of reports that we were receiving gave us cause for concern, without a doubt. So we decided to have this rally. Now, when we decided to have the rally, one of the things that concerned us was how are we going to get the Malaysian public interested in electoral reform? Because I can tell you, until that day, it was not a subject that really appealed to many Malaysians. People didn't bother about it too much. They didn't think it was important enough, or they thought, this is them going on and on about electoral, what's wrong with our electoral system? A lot of people didn't see the issues. So one of the issues for us was, how are we going to publicize this, for goodness sake? So we had all sorts of plans, that we were going to have workshops, road shows, etc., etc., etc. So once we announced it, we thought, right, now we have to start working on public relations in promoting the event. Did we have to worry though? Because we didn't have to do a single thing to promote Bersih 2. The government did it for us on a daily basis. And the reaction to Bersih 2 actually was rather alarming. In fact, it took many of us by shock and surprise, and I think it took ordinary Malaysians by surprise. What really was bothering them about Bersih 2? What was bothering them about asking for free and fair elections? And for a long time I couldn't figure it out. Of course, one of the things I thought probably was because they thought the opposition was behind it. But even then, Bersih 1 had taken place in 2007. So what more can happen with Bersih 2 taking place? So so we least expected, we didn't expect for a minute the type of reaction, the violent reaction that we were getting. And it was the reaction was so extreme because it involved personal attacks, of course, against members of the committee, against myself. There were threats of the ISA being arrested under the internal preventive detention laws, under ordinary laws. On a daily basis, we were getting threats from those in authority saying that they will use the full force of the law against us. There were threats in relation to our accounts. There were threats even in relation to my personal accounts, saying that, the lies basically, actually, saying that there were foreign funds coming into my account and I was using this, and the Bersih 2 organization was being funded by some strange organization, and so on and so forth. And they wanted to freeze the accounts. So on a daily basis, the public were being fed with all sorts of lies about Bersih 2. Now, I think that because they took this extreme reaction to what were very reasonable demands, July the 9th turned out to be much more than about electoral reform. People were so angry with the sheer and utter abuse of power that was being shown by the state, the way in which they were flaunting the might of their power, all right, was something that the Malaysian public, in my view, reacted to. And that's why July the 9th was the success that it was. because really ultimately people were not out there just about for electoral reform. They were out there because they were standing up to the abuse of power by the state. And I think that, to me, says a lot. Says a lot about Malaysians. Malaysians generally are not, don't like to, take on the state, as it were. But the number of people who were out there, who were prepared to do that, who were prepared to say enough is enough, was amazing. It's not something, unfortunately, I was not there in their midst, and I would have loved to have been there. What happened to me, if I can share that with you, was that on the day I was with the leaders of Pakatan. I was with Dato Sreenivasan and Tuan Guru Hari, and as well as the DAP leaders, and we went downstairs. We went actually to Central Station. I don't know if you know where the Central Station is in, yeah, of course we do. Central Station. Now there was we went down the escalator and into a tunnel-like area, an area that was covered only because there was construction going on. Now, as we walked out, or tried to walk out, we saw the riot police there, and of course they were, you know how they use their batons and they bang on their shields. Very intimidating, very, very intimidating. And they then, so I was turning away to try and go out the other end of the tunnel, and they started firing tear gas at all of us. And those who saw the videotape said that there were about 12 pellets of tear gas. Now this is firing tear gas into an enclosed area. And I can tell you they were firing at us, okay? Normally you're supposed to fire above. They were firing at us, obviously, partly because it's enclosed. Now, they were then, as we were running out the other side, they were firing tear gas at us from that end. So to me, they were not using the tear gas to disperse. Because if you were using tear gas to disperse, you would not fire at people from both ends. And now this was not only happening to us, it was happening to people in other areas of Kuala Lumpur. They were firing at them from both ends. So what does that mean? That means the tear gas was being used to punish. That's my view. Because if you want to disperse, you would just fire it and allow people to run away. But what they were doing is they were trapping people. That was what was some of the reports that we received. So anyway, that happened to me, and very shortly thereafter, it was the most awful experience I've had in my life. I couldn't breathe, and it's really quite awful. And shortly after that, I was arrested, and I was not released until the whole thing was over. I only saw later that night the numbers that turned out, and honestly, for me, when I saw that video, the earth moved a little bit, because I didn't for a minute think we would get those numbers. Because the roadblocks were up the night before, on the morning, they were going into hotels, arresting people. There was so many intimidatory tactics that were being used. I thought the Malaysian people would be completely put off. And as I understand it, the streets were pretty deserted until it was nearly 2 o'clock, and suddenly, out of nowhere, people just emerged. And the interesting thing is, because so many of the leaders had actually been arrested, who led, And really what happened was people took it upon themselves to organize, to lead, and everything that happened that day, it happened peacefully. Not a single pot was broken, no damage to property, nothing. Any damage to persons happened because of the police action against the peaceful demonstrators. Now, not all the police behaved in such high-handed fashion. There were actually police who allowed the demonstrators to demonstrate peacefully and to disperse peacefully. And that really is something that could have happened in all the areas in Kuala Lumpur. But some of the reaction, including the reaction that we received, was beyond, was too extreme, way too extreme, and there was just excessive use of force by the police in relation to the peaceful demonstrators. Now, the strange thing is, 2 days ago, because of the riots that have taken place in London, our leaders came out and said, you see, this is why we were tough on Bersih. We were tough on Bersih because, you know, we didn't want it to descend into the riots that are happening in London. The big difference, of course, I don't even need to tell you what the big difference is. The big difference is the violence where Bersih was concerned came from the police. It didn't come from us. We were the peaceful ones. That's the big difference. And we said, and the riots here, that there was violence. There was violence. And in fact, we had said to the police in our meetings with them, if any one of our Bersih supporters breaks the law, you go ahead and arrest them. All of us said that, even the past leaders, and Bersih leaders and political parties, whoever was met with the police said, you go ahead and enforce the law. We're not saying don't, if any of our Bersih supporters turn violent. So anyway, that basically is, in the run-up to the Bersih rally, you will now get a lot of stories, different stories about the promises that were made to us, and I received a lot of questions about this. One of it is, of course, were you promised a stadium? Well, yes, we were. If you recall, whoever was following the news, and I gather that you're all very up to date on the news of what's happening in Kuala Lumpur, but on the Sunday before the July 9th rally, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong had actually issued what we call a tita, the statement, basically saying, you know, don't proceed with the street rally. We then had an audience with the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, and just before that, an announcement was made by the Prime Minister that we could have our rally in a stadium. And we could stay there from morning to night and make as much noise as we want. He didn't care, but we had to have it at a stadium. So we then, after the meeting, after the audience with the King, we announced that we would take up the offer of a stadium, and we said we wanted Stadium Merdeka, which is in the center of, which is in Kuala Lumpur, and we knew that stadium was available because somebody had cancelled a concert there. So there would have been no problem for the government to have organized that stadium for us. So we said that's the stadium we want. It's easy for us to get people in, it's easy for us to get people out, it's convenient for everyone, etc., etc. Well, after the audience with the King, and just before the audience with the King, by the way, the minister comes out and declares us an illegal organization. After the audience with the King, we thought, now everybody will look at it slightly differently, we can talk about how we're going to do this in a stadium, and we can move on. The very next day, the minister, Home Minister comes out and says, sorry, you may have seen the King, but you're still illegal. You're still illegal. So then they said, Cabinet has a meeting on the Wednesday and decides you can't have Stadium Merdeka, you can have it in any of the, in fact one of the ministers said you can have it in any of the Pakatan states, in any of the stadiums in the Pakatan states. You cannot have it in Stadium Merdeka. There was no good reason given, by the way. So I said when I had my meeting with the police, I said, but what kind of promise is this? The promise is given by the federal government. We have every right to have it in Stadium Merdeka, and they tell us to go to a Pakatan state. I said, what kind of a promise is that is being made by the federal government? So anyway, there was a lot of digging and talking, and by the way, despite the fact that the Prime Minister had said we could have it in the Merdeka Stadium, when we saw the police on the Thursday, I think it was, yes, Thursday, they said, you have to apply for a permit. You still have to apply for a permit. I said, but the Prime Minister has said we can have this in a stadium. What do you mean we have to apply for a permit? They said, no, sorry, that's the law. So we said, okay, we'll apply for a permit. And they said, you can't apply through Bersih. Bersih is illegal. You have to use another organization. You see what we were going through? So we decided, okay, fine, we will do all that. We will also try and get Stadium Merdeka. Or you must also write to Stadium Merdeka. Anyway, Stadium Merdeka is something the Prime Minister could have easily made happen, but he didn't want to. By that time, by Friday, we got a phone call from the police, and this is even before we applied for a permit, by the way, before the application went in, saying, oh, by the way, your application is approved. So we thought, oh, great. And we sent someone rushing over to the police station. When we arrived there, they say, oh, sorry, actually, it's not approved. All right? So this is how we were mucked about by the authorities. The police saying one thing, the Prime Minister saying something else, and then all of them were going all over the place. And we said, we can't change. So we're going to go to the Merdeka Stadium. We're going to go to the car park of the Merdeka Stadium, and we hope you will open your doors. So that's why we proceeded, because we could not change our plan. Now I was asked, look, you said to the king that you would not have a street rally, but you ended up having a street rally. Well, my answer is, it was not meant to be a street rally. It was meant to be a rally in the stadium, but you blocked all the roads from God knows where until the stadium. The people had to walk. They had no choice, because you were not allowing transport in, you were not allowing them to come out of the LRT stations to get to the stadium. So that's something we didn't cause, you caused it. And in fact, the tragedy is actually, if they had just worked with us, it would have been over in 2 hours, they would have looked good, and everyone would have gone home very happy with the way the government had behaved. As it turned out, they created so much, animosity because of the manner in which they handled this. I think their ratings, their popularity would have has taken a nosedive because of the way in which they treated ordinary members of the public who were just asking for electoral reform. Now, I'm going to just round up very quickly with these last few comments, and then I'm going to let you ask me questions. Subsequent to the rally, I had 2 debates with the Election Commission. I don't know whether you saw that on the video. But since then, almost on a daily basis, we have been seeing complaints coming in about the electoral roll. We have got actual examples of permanent residents being registered to vote by the Election Commission. So on a daily basis, the Election Commission is being challenged. But what about this? What about that? And on a daily basis, the Election Commission is saying, oh, we'll correct that error, we'll correct that error, we'll correct that error. But prior to that, they were saying, there's nothing wrong with the electoral roll. Nothing wrong with the electoral roll. But since 9th July, everybody has become more alert. You actually have people going out there and looking at the electoral roll. Political parties are being very, very careful. I think PAS is doing a wonderful job. They've got their electoral roll on a computer, and they're doing a lot of checking. So on a daily basis, people are beginning to wake up to the fact that, hey, Bersih was right. They're right, the electoral roll is a mess, because this is the kind of information that's coming out. So what we are seeing, what the achievement of Bersih, apart from the fact that the ordinary Malaysian is no longer afraid of the threats and intimidation of the people in authority, apart from that, is a heightened awareness about the importance of electoral reform, of the importance of our institutions, and of the importance of keeping our government accountable. So I have people coming up to me saying, look, I never voted before, I was registered, I never voted before, but I'm voting this time for sure. Okay? And I have people saying, I never registered, I'm definitely registering. So what this has done, it's beyond our wildest imagination, because I told you, initially our problem was getting people interested in the issue in the first place. But now Malaysians know, because of the reaction of the government against this, that this is something we better pay attention to. What we find is that because of that, when I think it's going to be more difficult for the government to get away with answers that are unsatisfactory. And actually, many of the answers that are being given to us are wholly unsatisfactory. One of them is in relation to indelible ink. One of our demands is that the government uses indelible ink because that really does reduce fraud. They have refused to do it. Although in the year 2008, the Election Commission had made a decision that they would use indelible ink. Few days before the elections, they called it off. They said, oh, there are people who stole some ink in Thailand and now we're afraid of, I don't know, of something or other, of fraud or whatever it is. Of course, till to date, no one has been charged for any offences in relation to that. And the answers that they give as to why indelible ink cannot be used are not acceptable. Instead of which, now they've decided they want to introduce a biometric system. Now, that's frightening as well, because the biometric system is dependent on our registration system, you know, the identity card registration system, which is a mess. So if that's a mess, the biometric system is going to be a mess, because the database, there's a problem about the integrity of the database. So I don't know where they're going. So really, indelible ink is a very, very cheap alternative. I mean, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. You still have to use your identity card and so on, but it is a cheap alternative that has been used in other jurisdictions. But they are flat refusing to do that. The other thing they are flat refusing to do is inviting international observers. Our question, our issue is, if you say your elections are clean and fair, prove it by inviting international observers. Simple. But you know what they say? Oh, we can't invite international observers because our laws, they won't be familiar with our laws. Why do you need to know about laws to see whether there's election fraud going on? And I think international observers are experienced. They will be able to see fraud without even having to know what your legislation or your regulations are. So that's those are the kind of answers we're getting. And by the way, that's the other thing that this July the 9th has helped with, which is they can now see what we mean. Because the Election Commission keeps coming out with all these responses. Now the public can see, oh yeah, maybe there's not much point speaking to them. Because they actually still keep coming out. And this is, I'm talking about as recently as a few days ago, 3 or 4 days ago. 3 or 4 days ago, the Deputy Commissioner still comes out and says, our elections are clean and fair. This is in the Utusan, Malaysia. Our elections are clean and fair. There's nothing wrong with our elections. This whole thing about our elections, this attack on the EC is all because of the opposition. The opposition is trying to run us down and so on, and then he goes on to slam the opposition. Now, we have said it to him many times, we have said it over and over again, you have to stop attacking the opposition because you are supposed to be non-partisans. Please stop sounding like the government. But they don't get it. They just don't get it. And that is what is very worrying. They just don't get that they are supposed to be absolutely independent under our federal constitution. And that's worrying, because if the Election Commission doesn't get it, and they don't see that they are constitutionally obliged to be independent, then we have a problem. Now, I'm going to end with this, because I think I must tell you a little bit about what we are doing moving forward. We've written a letter which will go out on Monday to the Election Commission to say, set up a committee immediately, as we had suggested earlier, set up a committee with a representative from each political party and give them 3 months, give this task force 3 months to clean up the electoral rolls. If they don't do it, we are going to proceed to set up our own committee, and we are going to invite representatives from every political party, because I think we have to just get on with it. That's one. Number two, we are telling everybody, please register to vote if you haven't, and if you are registered, please go out and vote. As I was saying at the table earlier, if we can bring out the numbers, if we come out in droves to vote, we can mitigate electoral fraud to a certain extent. Right now, the percentages are about 70 to 75%. If we can push that to about 90%, we can mitigate the effects of potential electoral fraud. So that's the other message we're sending out. Everybody now, please, when the election comes around, vote. And in fact, where the overseas voters are concerned, we have to do something about your being disenfranchised. We have to do it. I know there is a civil suit that's going to be filed, but I think you have to keep putting pressure. They are listening, because I think they have sent some people over to the embassies to see how they can appoint assistant registrars. So I think you must put the pressure on. There are about 1 million, am I right? 1 million Malaysians out here who can register, who can make a difference. So to me, this is one of the ways in which you can mitigate electoral fraud. And that's why people keep saying, what's Bersih going to do? My question is, what are you going to do? And with that, thank you very much. A special thanks to Brian and Ross, who have been wonderful. They picked me up at the crack of dawn this morning, and they've organized this dinner. Now I will take questions. There's one here already.
Okay, please feel free to put up your hand and I'll come to bring the mic across.
Don't be shy.
So perhaps to kick things off, in terms of the efforts that's been done to make this a bipartisan exercise with Bersih, what were some of the reactions from not just BN, but was a specific effort done to communicate with other smaller parties as well?
Yes, well, let me say this. Right from the word go, we have sent invitations to all political parties to join us, right from the word go. But of course, only the opposition showed any interest at all. So as far as trying now to involve them, yes, we intend to, fully. Because in the task force, we intend to involve all political parties. In the, we're also writing to the UMNO youth head, because he has actually suggested that he would be prepared to meet with us to discuss electoral reform. So we're actually reaching out to all parties.
Anyone else?